Welcome to Relationships 101. I am Dr. Donna Tonry, and I am the Director of the Counseling and Family Therapy Master's Program here at LaSalle. I'm very pleased, I'm very pleased to be with you today, and also pleased to have Dr. Michael Sood and Dr. Dina DiNardo joining me for a conversation about relationships. Both Dr. Sood and Dr. DiNardo are licensed in marriage and family therapists and teach in our Marriage and Family Therapy Master's Program. Today we will discuss issues regarding blended families. Welcome Mike and Dina to our show today. And as you can tell from the topic, both of you being marriage and family therapists, it's pretty complex. And when I think of blended families, there's two words that immediately come into my mind: loyalty and defensiveness. It just seems to be the two issues that pop up most consistently through the work, whether it's with a couple, the family, the parents, the children, a combination. So I'd like to hear your thoughts. Maybe we could start with those two topics and then let's see where it takes us. So either one would like to begin.
Yeah. I think loyalty comes, when I think of loyalty, I immediately think of the children. And I think about them having a split loyalty to parents and to new step parents. Defensiveness, I think of parents sort of defending the way that they're raising their children if they've split, because now they're sort of adopting their different parenting styles and become entrenched in it. And so that's what immediately comes to mind for me when I think of loyalty and defensiveness.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'll just so I also think of, when I think of loyalty, I think of this idea that the biological parent bringing in a step parent or partner or whatever, there's this issue of loyalty to the children in the parenting role and loyalty to the new couple relationship, and that is often a strain. I think it's a strain for two biological parents. It's difficult, but that's even more so, I think, when a parent is coming in, a different parent or partner is coming into that. And defensiveness, I think also that many step parents become defensive about their roles, especially feeling often rejected by stepchildren, or even in that kind of situation, partner. That's a very difficult situation. So yeah, I think it's complex. I agree.
I kind of think of parents, let's just say biological or adoptive parents, kind of are hardwired to defend their children. So it's just innate in them that they're going to defend their children. And then I think what happens is the family blends, and let's suppose we're in a situation that there's 4 parents. So there's the couple, and there are 2 of the parents, and then there's another couple that is their exes. So it creates this defensiveness in a sense that suddenly for each parent, their children are now living with another adult that's in the role of not necessarily parent, but a parental role. And I think there's such a fine line from defending your children and then becoming defensive. And I think once that defensiveness comes into play, I think oftentimes that might be when we see them as a couple. Sometimes it's as a whole family and it's about parenting issues or the systems issues. But I have found that many times it's about the couple, because the defensiveness seems to spread into other aspects of their relationship, and they tend to get confused as to, these are deep feelings and they're significant and they're not always clear what it is that's going on and why they're feeling so intense. And my sense has been it's mostly around parenting. It's typically they don't come in with couples issues, they come in with these parenting issues that then affects the couple. So can you picture that and working with a couple? So is there anything in particular that you maybe focus on, or something that you do to help people to kind of exit that defensive stance and maybe be a little more objective and see their own point of view and the other's point of view, and how there might be a little bit of a clash, but not necessarily is it a problem? Am I making sense?
Yeah. I think I often default to being an advocate for the child, and so it's maybe a stylistic feature at this point in my work. And so what I look at is the way in which the parent is relating to their child, and maybe overly assuming that their experience is similar to their child's or that they know what's going on for their child. And so I find it very important to instill a deep sense of empathy from me to the parent and have them and their experience really feel validated from all the angles. And then I really like to incorporate what they think might be going on for their child as well. And I find that when they're able to feel validated and also put the child's best interest first in a way that's been kind of analyzed in therapy, that the defensiveness can decrease, because all of a sudden the child's well-being is more important, and they recognize that the defensiveness would actually make the experience for the child worse.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And Donna, just so I'm understanding, you're talking about for the couple of like the one biological parent and the one not, but yes. Yeah, I mean, I think that that's really true. So if they can focus on their, on the child's well-being, that's the most important thing. I think that helps a lot, and validating that that they're trying to be good parents. I completely agree. I think another thing that I talk about with them is often expectations. Like, I think a lot of people come in with expectations, I guess, that I often think are unrealistic. Things like, oh, well, this will be the new parent that they never had before, and then it's not that simple. Or, we'll just be able to have this relationship and be two parents with the kids, and there won't be, and it's not that simple. And I think so. Working with expectations sometimes I've found to be helpful. That I think that's a nice wish. I mean, that's a nice dream, and often not very realistic. Almost like when we adopt a kid. If parents adopt a kid, they often think, oh, we're just going to provide this home they never had. They're going to be forever grateful, and we're going to take care. And it's not that simple, because that child, for whatever reason, wasn't taken care of, and that's all still there. So I don't know. I find that helps as well, which I then think also kind of validates the difficulty of their experience. Hopefully, it was a lot harder than they thought it would be. Yeah.
Well, even for us discussing this, but it's good for us to try to simplify it so that the audience understands what we mean. However, it's incredibly difficult to do because this is so complex. So when you take this situation where you have the biological parent, you have the non-biological parent, you take the route that you're talking about, raise the concern for the child, put the needs of the child first. The non-biological parent can often buy into that. They want to roll. The biological parent then feels you're treading on my territory, this is my child first, this is my decision first, and then the non-biological parent feels kind of, what is my role? I wouldn't necessarily say that they feel left out, they feel confused. What is my role? What am I supposed to do? Yes. One thing that I have found helpful is that house rules can often be non-emotional, so that's where parents can begin to agree. So let's just say the house rules are chores, and certain children have certain chores, and the couple agree. And when we start breaking it down to that, let's just talk about the chores. And how do each of you have a role in making sure the chores are done? What I have found is when the biological parent isn't home, the non-biological parent can easily say, tonight's your night to do chores, and he's not stepping out of what the biological parent would be out of line, in a sense. But I have found that to be the most difficult thing for the couple to manage and emotionally.
I was thinking about how difficult is it for some people to follow those rules, and I think that's directly impacted by the nature of how the biological parents are actually getting along, what the relationships are between the step parents with each of the and I think that the less that children are willing to kind of comply or go according to rules, the more we need to look to the adult relationships to see what's going on in those interactions, because I think therein lies some work for us to do.
I was just going to say, what I've experienced a lot is that the new parenting couple, if you could even call it that, I guess depending on who you're talking to, it changes, but they often don't agree on the rules. You're too hard on them, you're too soft on them. And so it gets really difficult, because sometimes it's like technically the step parent's home, yet the biological parent's children. And so it gets really tricky. You can't make decisions for my kid. Well, this is my house. So it's really tricky.
It is.
Because it's kind of like they both have a point. Like,
Sure, and there's also a very significant spectrum of parents, step-parents who will come into the picture who will feel almost entitled to have the children follow the rules, and I'm now in this role, and so
Yes.
you should obey me.
Yes.
And then on the other end, I've seen some step-parents that they're like, I don't really want anything to do with your kids, so you raise your kids, and on the weekends that you have the kids, I actually am busy. And so I think finding out more about the individual psychology of the person that is the step-parent is probably requisite to doing any type of work.
Right. One of the difficulties I have seen is, I mean, my thought to go to the next part of this would be, okay, so now we have two sets of parents, and you have the schedules and all of that. But sometimes what's harder is when the step-parent that comes in has no children and hasn't gone through the parenting process. And the only thing they have is their perception of what parenting is. And they walk in with their perception and attempt to present it. Sometimes that actually creates more difficulty because they really don't understand. When, becoming a parent, you learn from the day one and from doing it. And if you haven't done it, you really only have your parenting experience to rely on.
Yep.
And that sometimes actually makes it more difficult, because I think sometimes people will say, well, I'd like to meet somebody without any children, and they find out, well, gee, it's not as non-complicated as you think it's going to be. So it's just really complex.
It's interesting you say that. On the one hand, I agree with you that makes it more difficult. On the other hand, it's not a different set of children you're also dealing with. It's not two sets of children, which in some way
Right.
makes it simpler. So
Yes.
I think you
Yes.
said, the whole thing is just incredibly complex. No matter kind of what the situation is, it's just a different set of complexities.
Yes. It's
I've-
amazing.
I've seen actually a couple of families where there were children from the original marriage, there was a divorce, and where oftentimes in a heterosexual dynamic where a woman marries a man and the woman doesn't already have children, but the man already does have children.
Well, as you can see, we have a lot to talk about when it comes to issues regarding blended families. We'll take a short break, and when we come back, we will have you join us for the rest of our discussion with Dr. Michael Sood and Dr. Dina DiNardo.
Wake each morning and get lost in the adventure, knowing that you will be ready for wherever the day takes you. Learn from those willing to teach. Their wisdom and their strength will become yours. They will impart to you a tradition of education nationally recognized for its value. A tradition worthy of your best efforts. As young men and women of LaSalle, we will invest in you the guidance to blaze your own path. To go forth into the unknown with new certainty. To realize your full potential as professionals, as leaders, as citizens. To take up your place as the accountants, speech therapists, journalists, and CEOs of your generation. To impact this city and the world beyond. These adventures are yours, and you are ready for them. Explorers are never lost.
Welcome back to Relationships 101. I'm your host, Dr. Donna Tonry, Director of LaSalle's Counseling and Family Therapy Master's Programs. Joining me to discuss issues regarding blended families are Dr. Michael Sood and Dr. Dina DiNardo. Dina, as we ended up the last segment, you were talking about a particular thing you see with couples having one person of the couple having a child and the other person not.
Yeah.
Do you want to continue that?
Yeah, so you mentioned that that's an interesting dynamic where the new partner doesn't have any children, and what I was thinking about was that I've seen several families where it's been the case that a woman married a man and the man already had children, but the woman didn't. And the man didn't necessarily want to have any more children, but the woman really did. And so I've seen lots of kiddos come in, and as I've gone over their history or what they're presenting for, I've seen a dynamic where he's the product of a second marriage and there are other children that are significantly older. And so I think that I've seen some tough couple issues come up when someone agrees to have a child to make the other person happy in the context of a blended family.
Right.
I've seen it quite a bit.
Well, it's interesting. What comes to mind for me, and it may not totally connect to your full point, but I've seen it where one of the couple have a child and one doesn't. They marry and then they have another child. And say woman or man has a child. What happens is the child that was already present has a different last name. When the woman takes the man's name and then they have a child, there's 3 people with the same last name and there's 1 child without. And that may sound simple, but I have seen that it really affects the child. They feel somewhere, in some way, that, okay, I'm an outsider in some way. And as simple as that might sound, I've had to work with parents to understand what that might feel like for the child. So that just popped into my mind as you were saying that, in a sense, there's so many things that can come up. And that's, kind of a simple one, but it pops up.
Sure. Have you noticed any trends as it relates to work that you've done with blended families?
Yeah. So a couple of the things I'm thinking about as we're talking. One is an issue of, so it's kind of what we were talking about before with the rules and stuff. So I've seen a lot of step-parents come in, and I think you were talking earlier about this idea of confusion about roles you both were talking about, of the new parent, quote unquote, wanting a role. And often, this is more typical, I think, of male new parents than female new parents, but often that role involves some kind of disciplining. And that's not going well. And that's often one of the presenting issues when they come in. And so usually what I've told those parents is to basically avoid disciplining until they trust you. That, like, I can hear my old advisor's voice saying, until they know that you love them more than anything else in the world. And that's really tricky, the trust thing, because they often feel like, well, what have I done to lead them to not trust you? And it's like, well, it's not that simple. They had another parent who, for whatever reason, is not there. Even if they are there, the relationship is not there that was there. So they've had these breaches of trust at some level, even whether personally with their own parent not taking care of them. Hard to trust another. You should say, if you can't trust the people who brought you into the world to take it, why would you trust anybody else?
Sure.
And even if the other parent is involved, they're not necessarily trusting the relationship and that person will be around because they've already had a relationship split. So it's not about what you did, but it's about what's happened to this person. It's what you're coming into.
Sure.
So those are trends that I've seen and worked with a lot.
Yeah, and I think so we're talking about the personality styles of each person and what they're bringing to it. And in that instance, it's like, it's not about you. And I think that's one of the most difficult aspects, to not personalize it.
Absolutely.
That's right. And that they have to basically tolerate a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, it could go on for over a decade. I mean, and sometimes, depending on when that person comes into in childhood, some kids could be adults by the time that trusting relationship really solidifies.
And going back, Mike, to what you were saying, why should this child trust this adult that they don't know that well? So that all makes sense. But now you have the other biological parent that may not be trusting this step parent and maybe giving some messages to the child that maybe that biological parent's not so comfortable with maybe hearing the discipline or hearing something that's happening that makes that person uncomfortable. And I mean, who knows their own level of differentiation, whatever that person's going through as a person, as a parent, in their own new couple relationship.
Yes.
So it really puts the child, in a sense, carrying some of the weight for the parents they're living with, the parents that maybe they have visitation or live with half the time, and a new relationship forming. It's a lot for the kids. It's a lot for them to deal with. And then we have to think about developmentally. So sometimes when the kids are younger, it's easier because they can kind of grow into these relationships.
Sure.
But when it's a 16-year-old, it's a whole different
Oh, yeah.
story. It's really tough.
I also find that families largely are not having process conversations about it, about how it's going. And I've had some families come in where they do have excellent conversations in the therapy room. And I think to myself, you guys don't necessarily need me. You could have these conversations on your own. But I think they feel the support of having a therapist there. Sometimes, other times they fully need guidance throughout the entire portion. But I guess my point is that sometimes it's just not being discussed and parents don't know how to discuss it.
Right.
So we're in a unique opportunity to educate them about how to go about discussing it.
And we're certainly finding that this is a common phenomenon today. I mean, there's so many blended families. And because it's common, and because it's no longer unusual, I do think people tend to think that makes it possibly easy.
Oh.
And then they find the complexity and maybe weren't expecting it. Because now you start off and you have typically marital problems, and that's why you ended your marriage. And now you come into it and you may not have marital problems, but suddenly you have these issues that are as intense, as emotionally difficult, confusing, and I think they're kind of feeling like they were blindsided. They didn't know that this was going to happen.
Well, and the marital problems tend to play out in the children.
Yep, I agree. And I think another thing is that I think parents often underestimate, probably because it's hard to acknowledge how their behavior affects their children. Usually feel so responsible anyway. That's very hard to deal with, and to acknowledge your child's in pain. How much loss and pain their kids are in. They tell themselves things like kids are resilient, things like, and it totally undermines. So if like a parent isn't around, whether they've died or left, or they have a hard time understanding how that's still very present in their kids' lives, and that often kind of colors the whole situation. But they're, like you're saying, they're not talking about it. It's so interesting.
Well, two things though. I guess one is the fact that they're coming in to therapy is a really good sign. I do think that sometimes though when they're coming in for therapy, that also creates a discomfort for them, because why do we need this? We were so in love, we were so sure we could blend this so easily. So helping them actually be comfortable with that process, that this isn't easy. No matter who it is, no matter how healthy you are, no matter how adjusted your children are, there's a piece of this that isn't easy, and the complexity can be what is confusing.
And unique to each family, really.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's the case with a lot of the stuff, we just talk about with families. I usually, I say to the students, if this stuff was easy, we wouldn't be sitting here together.
Right.
We wouldn't be sitting here together if this was easy. So I think that can help too, just, I'm sorry, yeah.
Well, I was just going to say, as you were talking, I'm picturing myself, and one of the things I do is a genogram, and you always do the genogram of each part of the couple. So you have, say, the woman, and you have the man, and you do her genogram and her family tree and his family history. There's another family history in there that belongs to the children, and we have to keep in mind that that history comes into play as well. However, when they're sitting there as a couple, they're thinking of this current history, and we're seeing the larger history, which again goes back to what you were saying, that they may not recognize that there's so many pieces here for us to attend to, and it just...
And it's not because the parents are negligent, it's just sometimes they're doing so much with their own transition and pain and struggle and trying to make this work that they're, it's just not aware. And so,
So what are some of the positives you see? Because we're talking about the difficulty, and anyone watching this will be saying, oh my God, it's so difficult. But what about the positives? What is it that you see when you're working with couples that have these two sets of families that they're blending together? Can you talk about some of that you've seen?
I would just say that sometimes if there's kids from different relationships, sometimes they form bonds. Sometimes that are as strong or feel even stronger than their own biological siblings. That can happen. I think just from a very basic standpoint that these families learn that they can struggle through difficult things, which kids and adults can take them many other places in life. I think that's a good thing to know.
Right.
So
I've seen new marriages or step-parents come in where there's been actually a much healthier relationship than existed between the original biological parents, and then that has a ripple effect for the entire blended family. So it's very nice when that happens. It gives us a lot of additional strength to work with.
Right.
I completely agree.
And then the children have an extended support system. They have more adults that are there for them, wanting to come through for them, willing to go into therapy to figure out how to make it better. Maybe doing family therapy as well as couples or a combination of the two. So I do think there are many positives that occur, and I'm glad we were able to end it on a positive. We hope you've enjoyed today's conversation on Relationships 101. You can reach us by going to our website at lasalle.edu/grad-MFT or lasalle.edu/grad-CFT to learn about all of our programs. And thank you for watching.